The humble gardener. Dorothy Caldwell knelt in her garden, her weathered hands gently coaxing life from the rich soil. At 75, she moved with the practiced grace of someone who had spent decades nurturing both plants and people. The morning sun filtered through the oak trees, casting dappled shadows across her prized rose bushes. "These beauties will surely win at the garden club this year," she murmured to herself, admiring the vibrant crimson blooms that seemed to glow in the golden light. Her gardening attire told a story of practicality over fashion, faded jeans softened by countless washings, a simple lavender sweater, and her beloved gray cardigan, the same one she'd worn for gardening for over a decade. Specks of soil decorated the fabric like badges of honor, evidence of her dedication to her craft. The modest ranch-style home behind her sat quietly at the end of an upscale neighborhood, deliberately understated compared to the grand mansions that lined the rest of Maple Ridge Drive. Dorothy and her husband Walter had chosen this house not because they couldn't afford better, but because it felt like home. For nearly 50 years, they had built a life that defied society's expectations. Walter had transformed his father's small hardware store into a national corporation, growing it steadily through decades of hard work and smart decisions. When he retired 10 years ago, their fortune was substantial, more than most people would earn in several lifetimes. Yet you would never know it by looking at them. They drove sensible cars, lived in their comfortable but modest home, and dressed without designer labels or flashy logos. Their wealth was a carefully guarded secret, shared only with their financial advisor and closest family. "We don't need to announce our bank account to the world," Walter often said, and Dorothy agreed wholeheartedly. Their money was a tool for security and generosity, not a costume for show. As Dorothy brushed the soil from her hands and checked her watch, she realized Walter would be finishing his weekly golf game soon. Every Thursday, he met with 3 other retired businessmen, men who shared their philosophy of living humbly despite their success. They were an unusual group in their wealthy community, choosing substance over style at every turn. A sudden idea struck her, bringing a smile to her lined face. Their golden anniversary was approaching in just 2 months, and Walter's faithful sedan, a reliable but aging vehicle, had been showing signs of wear lately. Perhaps it was time for a surprise, something special to mark their milestone and replace his trusted but tired car. Dorothy had noticed a luxury dealership during her weekly drive to the community center. The sleek vehicles in the windows had caught her attention, not for their status symbol appeal, but for their obvious craftsmanship and engineering excellence. Walter had always appreciated quality, even if he didn't care for ostentation. The more she thought about it, the more the idea appealed to her. A quick visit to browse their options couldn't hurt. Nothing serious, just gathering information for a potential anniversary surprise that would show Walter how much she still cared after all these years. The unwelcome visitor. Dorothy quickly washed her hands at the kitchen sink, but didn't bother changing clothes. At her age, comfort trumped fashion, and besides, she was just browsing. Her appearance had never defined her worth, and she wasn't about to start caring about such things now. As she backed her 10-year-old sedan out of the driveway, Dorothy had no idea that her simple decision would lead to one of the most humiliating encounters of her life. She hummed softly, envisioning Walter's surprise if she found something truly special. Prestige Motors gleamed in the afternoon sun, its glass facade reflecting the cloudless sky like a mirror. Rows of high-end vehicles sat in perfect formation, sleek sports cars, elegant sedans, and imposing SUVs that looked more like sculptures than transportation. Their polished surfaces were almost too bright to look at directly. Dorothy parked her modest sedan between 2 expensive vehicles, immediately noticing how her car seemed to shrink in comparison. She straightened her cardigan, suddenly aware of the soil still lingering under her fingernails and the casual nature of her attire. For a brief moment, she considered returning another day, perhaps better dressed. "Don't be silly," she muttered to herself. "You're just looking." The showroom enveloped her in luxury the moment she stepped inside. The scent of leather and subtle cologne filled the air, while gleaming tile floors reflected the tasteful lighting designed to make every curve and contour of the vehicle shine. Classical music played softly in the background, creating an atmosphere more suited to an art gallery than a car lot. Several salespeople in perfectly tailored suits moved around the floor, engaged with customers who looked like they had stepped out of a business magazine. Dorothy quickly realized she was the only person in casual clothes and certainly the oldest by at least 2 decades. Her eyes were drawn to a striking yellow sports car in the center of the showroom. Its design was both elegant and aggressive, with lines that suggested motion even as it sat perfectly still. Dorothy approached it slowly, genuinely appreciating the artistry of its construction. "It's beautiful," she said quietly, allowing her fingertips to hover just above the surface without actually touching it. As she circled the vehicle, Dorothy became aware of being watched. A young man with perfectly styled hair and an expensive suit stood nearby, arms crossed, whispering something to another salesperson. Both men glanced in her direction, and she caught the younger one's smirk. The young man, Kevin, according to his name tag, finally approached her. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and his tone carried a subtle edge of condescension. "Can I help you?" he asked, the word suggesting he doubted she needed any help at all, at least not with purchasing a car. "Just looking for now," Dorothy replied pleasantly. "My husband might be interested in something new." Kevin's eyes swept over her gardening clothes, lingering on the soil stains on her cardigan and her practical shoes. His expression shifted from professional disinterest to barely concealed disdain. "These vehicles start at $90,000, he said flatly. "The one you're looking at is $275,000. Dorothy nodded, unperturbed by the figures. "It's quite extraordinary. Is it possible to see the interior?" Kevin's hesitation was obvious, his disbelief evident in every line of his face. Around them, other salespeople were engaged in animated conversations with clients who fit the dealership's expected demographic perfectly. Dorothy stood her ground, her dignity intact despite Kevin's obvious judgment. The humiliation. Kevin's hesitation lasted only a moment before he produced a thin, practiced smile. "Of course," he said, though his tone suggested he was simply humoring her. He pressed a button on a sleek key fob, and the car's door opened upward with theatrical elegance. The Velocitas GT features hand-stitched Italian leather, carbon fiber trim, and a custom sound system, he rattled off mechanically, without the enthusiasm he would typically reserve for a serious customer. Dorothy leaned in carefully, admiring the craftsmanship without touching anything. "The detailing is exquisite," she observed genuinely. Kevin checked his watch, making no effort to hide his impatience. "It does 0 to 60 in 3.2 seconds, though I doubt that's a selling point for your husband." The slight pause and emphasis conveyed his skepticism about the existence of said husband, or at least his ability to afford such a vehicle. From across the showroom, Dorothy noticed 2 other salespeople glancing her way and chuckling quietly. A well-dressed couple who had entered after her were already being offered refreshments and seated in the luxurious client lounge area. "What about financing options?" Dorothy asked, straightening up with renewed interest. Kevin's eyebrows rose slightly, and his mask of professional courtesy began to slip. "Our financing requires excellent credit and typically a substantial down payment. Usually around 30%. "That seems reasonable," Dorothy replied calmly. Kevin's expression hardened. He glanced around the showroom, then back at Dorothy with unconcealed irritation. "Ma'am, I think you might be more comfortable at one of the used car lots down the street. We specialize in luxury vehicles for serious buyers." The words hit Dorothy like a physical blow. Other customers had begun to notice the exchange, their conversations quieting as they turned to watch. The elegant showroom suddenly felt hostile, its gleaming surfaces reflecting her embarrassment back at her from every angle. "I am a serious buyer," Dorothy said quietly, maintaining her composure despite the heat rising in her cheeks. Kevin's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Look, lady, I don't have time for this. These cars cost more than most people make in 3 years. Maybe try the Toyota dealership across town, they have some nice, practical sedans that would be more in your price range." The humiliation was complete. Dorothy felt the stares of other customers burning into her back, heard the whispered comments and barely suppressed laughter. Her cardigan suddenly felt like a costume, her soil-stained clothes an advertisement of her unworthiness. Kevin took a step closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Listen, I don't know what game you're playing, but you're wasting my time and disturbing our other clients." "The exit is there," he said, pointing toward the door with barely concealed contempt. Dorothy stood frozen for a moment, the weight of the humiliation settling over her like a heavy blanket. In 75 years, she had never been treated with such blatant disrespect. The young man's arrogance was breathtaking, his assumptions about her worth based solely on her appearance. With as much dignity as she could muster, Dorothy nodded slowly. "I understand," she said quietly. "Thank you for your time." As she walked toward the exit, the showroom seemed to stretch endlessly before her. Every step felt observed, every whisper seemed to follow her. The classical music that had seemed so elegant upon her arrival now sounded mocking, providing a soundtrack to her public humiliation. Dorothy reached her car and sat for a moment, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the steering wheel. But as she drove home, something began to change inside her. The humiliation was giving way to something else, a quiet, determined anger that she hadn't felt in years. By the time she pulled into her driveway, Dorothy had made a decision. Tomorrow, Kevin and Prestige Motors would learn that appearances could be very deceiving indeed. The return. That evening, Dorothy sat across from Walter at their modest dining table, recounting the day's events. Walter's face grew increasingly dark as she described Kevin's treatment, his weathered hands clenching into fists. 50 years we've been married," Walter said quietly, his voice tight with controlled anger, "and in all that time, no one has ever treated my wife with such disrespect." Dorothy reached across the table and took his hand. "I have an idea," she said, a spark of mischief in her eyes that Walter hadn't seen in years. The next morning, Walter made a phone call to an old business associate in the city. Within 2 hours, a gleaming Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled into their driveway, midnight black with chrome so polished it looked like liquid mercury. The vehicle was worth more than most people's homes. Dorothy had chosen her outfit carefully this time, a simple but elegant navy dress, pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother, and her late grandmother's diamond wedding ring, a stone so impressive she rarely wore it for fear of attracting attention. Walter, usually content in his casual retirement wear, had donned his finest suit, the same one he'd worn to board meetings when he was closing million-dollar deals. His silver hair was perfectly styled, and his demeanor carried the quiet authority of a man who had built an empire from nothing. They drove to Prestige Motors in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. As they pulled into the parking lot, Dorothy felt a familiar flutter of nerves, but this time it was anticipation rather than anxiety. The Rolls-Royce caused an immediate stir. Customers and salespeople alike turned to stare as Walter guided the magnificent vehicle into a parking space directly in front of the showroom. The car's presence seemed to command respect from the very building itself. Walter opened Dorothy's door with old-fashioned gallantry, and together they walked toward the entrance. Dorothy noticed Kevin immediately. He was standing near the yellow sports car, engaged in conversation with the same colleague who had witnessed her humiliation the day before. The moment they entered, the atmosphere shifted palpably. The showroom manager, a distinguished man in his 50s, approached them immediately with the kind of deference usually reserved for visiting dignitaries. "Good morning. Welcome to Prestige Motors. I'm Michael Harrison, the general manager. How may we assist you today?" Walter's voice carried the calm authority of a man accustomed to being heard. "My wife was here yesterday looking at vehicles. She wasn't treated with the respect she deserved. I'd like to speak with the young man who served her." Harrison's face immediately clouded with concern. His eyes swept the showroom until they found Kevin, who had gone pale and was staring at them with dawning recognition and horror. "Kevin," Harrison called sharply. "Please come here immediately." Kevin approached slowly, his earlier arrogance replaced by obvious panic. His hands shook slightly as he recognized Dorothy, and his eyes kept darting to the Rolls-Royce visible through the showroom windows. "This is my wife, Dorothy," Walter said calmly. "Yesterday, she came here to look at cars for our anniversary. Instead of receiving proper service, she was insulted, humiliated, and told to leave. I believe you were the salesperson responsible." Kevin's face had gone from pale to ashen. I didn't, sir, there must be some misunderstanding." Dorothy stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. "There's no misunderstanding, young man. You assumed that because of my appearance, I couldn't afford your cars. You judged me based on my clothes and my age, and you treated me with contempt." Harrison looked mortified. "Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell," Walter supplied. Walter and Dorothy Caldwell. The name clearly meant something to Harrison, his eyes widened with recognition. Walter Caldwell's business success had been featured in the local business journal numerous times over the years. "Mr. Caldwell, I am deeply, profoundly sorry. This is absolutely unacceptable behavior, and I assure you there will be consequences." Walter nodded slowly. "My wife came here yesterday interested in purchasing a vehicle. Today, we're here to complete that purchase, but not from him." He gestured toward Kevin, who looked like he might be sick. "Justice served." Harrison immediately assigned his most senior salesperson, Maria, to assist the Caldwells. She was a consummate professional who treated them with the respect and attention they deserved from the moment she approached. As Maria walked them through the showroom, explaining features and options with genuine enthusiasm, Kevin stood frozen nearby, watching his commission, and likely his job, slip away. The yellow Velocitas GT that Dorothy had admired the day before was indeed impressive, but Walter had his eye on something even more special. "That one," he said, pointing to a pristine silver sedan in the corner. "The Bentley Continental GT. What can you tell us about it?" Maria's eyes lit up. "An excellent choice, Mr. Caldwell. It's our flagship luxury sedan, $350,000, but worth every penny. Handcrafted interior, 12-cylinder engine, and customizable features." Dorothy ran her hand along the car's smooth surface, remembering how Kevin had treated her when she'd shown interest in something far less expensive. "It's beautiful, Walter." "We'll take it," Walter said simply. "Cash." The words dropped into the showroom like a stone into still water. Conversation stopped, heads turned, and Kevin visibly swayed on his feet. A cash purchase of that magnitude was rare enough to be legendary in car sales circles. Harrison reappeared at Walter's elbow. "Mr. Caldwell, if I may, I'd like to personally handle the paperwork for this transaction. And please, allow me to offer you our premium service package at no additional charge. It's the least we can do after yesterday's unfortunate incident." As they moved to Harrison's office to complete the purchase, Dorothy noticed Kevin slumped against the wall, his earlier arrogance completely deflated. The other salespeople were giving him a wide berth, and she could see Harrison making notes in what was clearly a disciplinary file. The paperwork took less than an hour, a testament to the power of a cash transaction and excellent credit. As they prepared to leave, Dorothy asked to speak with Kevin one final time. The young man approached reluctantly, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I was completely wrong, and Dorothy held up a gentle hand to stop him. "Kevin, I want you to remember this moment. Not because I want you to suffer, but because I want you to learn. Every person who walks through that door deserves respect, regardless of how they're dressed or how old they are. You never know who you're talking to or what their story might be." Kevin nodded miserably. "Yes, ma'am. I understand." "I hope you do," Dorothy said kindly. "Because character isn't measured by the car you drive or the clothes you wear. It's measured by how you treat others, especially when you think no one important is watching." Harrison approached as they concluded their conversation. "Kevin will no longer be employed with Prestige Motors as of today," he said quietly. "This kind of discrimination has no place in our business. Walter and Dorothy exchanged glances. Despite everything, they took no pleasure in Kevin's termination. Perhaps, Walter suggested thoughtfully, instead of firing him, you might consider this a teaching moment. Require him to complete sensitivity training, dock his pay, put him on probation. Young people can learn from their mistakes if given the chance. Harrison looked surprised but nodded slowly. That's very gracious of you, Mr. Caldwell. As they walked toward their new Bentley, Dorothy felt a sense of closure she hadn't expected. The humiliation of the previous day had been transformed into something more valuable, a lesson in dignity, respect, and the power of giving second chances. Walter opened her door, and as she settled into the luxurious leather seat, Dorothy smiled. Their anniversary gift had turned into something much more meaningful than either of them had anticipated. The Bentley pulled smoothly out of the parking lot, leaving behind a dealership full of people who would never again judge a customer by their appearance. Kevin, still shaken but grateful for his second chance, would go on to become one of their most respectful and successful salespeople. As for Dorothy and Walter, they drove home in their magnificent new car, their 50-year marriage enriched by another shared adventure. The yellow roses in Dorothy's garden would bloom beautifully that year, but not as beautifully as the lesson in human dignity that had blossomed from a simple trip to buy a car. Sometimes the most important journeys aren't measured in miles, but in the wisdom gained along the way. And sometimes, the most elegant revenge is simply living well and treating others with the grace they forgot to show you. The end.